Hey friends, Christian here, and I'm finally going to tell you what OIM believes ministry is for. This question, what is ministry for, is something we rarely ask ourselves, yet we frequently have ideas that run in the background and determine how we measure the success of our ministry. And it is these stories that shape what we believe ministry is for. And these stories deeply influence how we actually do ministry with young people. This is explored really well in Andrew Root's book, Bringing Theology to Youth Ministry. But if I'm honest, the real reason that I know these stories is because I've believed all of them at some point. So if you find yourself in any of these stories, just know, I've been there. In fact, we've probably all been there. Today, I want to share 3 common stories that shape what we believe ministry is for. To do so, I want to invite back John, Joanne, and Yanni. You remember them from all of those St. Barsanuphiuses. The other day, they were telling me what they felt was going wrong in their ministries, and so I've asked them to share those feelings with you. Everyone, welcome back, John.
I was just saying that, it seems like my kids don't really get this whole, Orthodox thing. I saw some of their Instagrams and they were all smoking hookah. I even heard some of them drank at prom. It's like, no wonder they don't stay engaged. They don't even know how to behave themselves.
Yeah, John, I totally get it. I remember the first year that I was a camp counselor, I was so frustrated with my 16 and 17-year-olds. They'd complain in church that it was too long, that they were too tired, that they needed water, and then we'd walk outside and they'd immediately start hitting each other with sticks. Not even the 7-year-olds acted like that. I remember thinking, do you even love God? And I eventually got so irritated with them that I lost my cool. Quickly after that, however, I realized that I was more concerned with their behavior than anything else, and that I was measuring my success as a counselor based on how they acted. Turns out, I had been believing the story that ministry is for keeping kids good. If they behaved, it meant I had a good ministry with them. And while God does call us to a life of holiness, it is much deeper than simply being on our best behavior. I'd now like to welcome back Joanne to tell us what she has noticed in her parish. Joanne, welcome back.
Yeah, so it's tough because I love Sunday school, but the kids really don't seem to understand the importance of serving the world around us. Our church is near a pretty poor part of Houston, but it seems like every time we try to organize some kind of outreach, only like 3 kids come. It's like they don't realize how blessed they are and can't give back at all.
Joanne, thank you. I hear you. I remember believing the same thing about outreach, and that if more kids came, then it would mean that our church was doing things right. There's no doubt that Jesus tells us to care for the poor. In fact, it's actually super central to a lot of what he says, so we would do well to listen better. But I started equating serving the poor with being a Christian. And while you can't really be a Christian without serving the least of these, you can serve them without it being an act of faith. Also, I remember thinking that if more people came to things, whether it was service projects or whatever, then it meant we were doing things right. But all of this changed for me when about 40 kids came to youth group once, and it just wasn't the same. The conversation just felt flat. There's a double trap here, I think, when we begin to believe stuff like this, that ministry is about keeping as many kids as possible, as active as possible. Because that's not ministry, that's activism. While Jesus does call us to a life of service, mere activity isn't the same thing as being a Christian. Jesus calls us to follow him, not just to be busy for him. And relying on numbers isn't a worthwhile indicator of whether or not your ministry is fruitful. Remember, even Jesus himself only had 12 close followers at some points, and he turned the world upside down. Finally, welcome back, Yanni.
Yeah, it's sad. When I try to do Goya, it's clear these kids know nothing about the faith. They don't even know where Genesis is in the Bible. And when their friends of other faiths share what they believe, they can't explain why orthodoxy is right. We're just worried that if these kids don't know what the church teaches, then they'll go off to college and lose faith, and our church pews will get emptier and emptier.
Yanni, I really get it. I became Orthodox when I was in high school, and so I also really want my children to believe what the church teaches. When I teach Sunday school, I find myself really wanting them to get it, so that they can believe that this really is the true faith. But I began to realize something when my close friend got really interested in learning about Islam. One can learn a lot about a faith, but still not believe it. Knowing theology and knowing about orthodoxy is not the same thing as knowing God. We are not called simply to know about God in our heads, but to meet him in our lives and to know him in our hearts. When we approach ministry this way, we end up placing the living God who acts in the world in a small box of facts, And then our job is about passing on that information in order to keep kids orthodox. But that's not ministry. It's traditionalism. Yaroslav Pelikan put it best when he said, "Tradition is the living faith of the dead, and traditionalism is the dead faith of the living." It was tough, but I had to realize that keeping kids in pews was not the same thing as helping them love Jesus Christ. So friends, if you're like me, you probably have stumbled into some of these stories yourself. And it's no wonder that these stories don't work because they don't point to Christ. They point to themselves. They are not ministry. They are moralism, they are activism, they are traditionalism. So this leads to our big question. What is ministry for? In the first chapter of Genesis, we see God lay out his plans for humanity. This is especially important because we need to recognize that God himself is the first minister to humankind. In fact, we might even say that ministry itself is God's own work, that it's what God does. And in Genesis 1:26, we see exactly what this ministry, what this work of God is. Let us make humankind in our image after our likeness. That's it. The ministry of God is to make human beings like himself. What's more is this is God's work alone. Only God can make human beings like himself. So our role as ministry workers is to participate in this work of God in the lives of youth and young adults. In fact, that's ministry with anybody. It's about opening space for God to act and participating in the work of God to make human beings like himself. Think about that. As ministry workers, we have been invited to work alongside the God of the universe in his beautiful and perfect plan to make human beings in his likeness. We've been invited to participate in God's desire to make human beings as embodiments of his love which is patient, kind, not jealous or boastful, not arrogant or rude, not insisting on its own way, not irritable or resentful, not rejoicing in wrong, but rejoicing in right, bearing all things, believing all things, hoping all things, enduring all things. Yes, becoming love itself is the metric of success in God's way of doing ministry with young people. And while it's definitely okay to hope for good, active, and orthodox kids, this isn't the measure that God applies. It's about becoming human beings of love. And the only way for young people to become love is for them to encounter Christ, embody his church, and engage the world in his name. I know you've heard these 3 E's from us a lot, but they're really important. These are the steps that we have seen the holy ones of God tread for centuries, and it's these 3 steps that are going to help young people become forces of love in the world around them. And it is precisely this 3-step path that we're going to talk about next week as we explore what it means for young people to encounter Christ, embody his church, and engage the world in his name. In the meantime, make sure you head over to our Facebook and Instagram pages at Orthodox Youth Ministries and follow them both. Go to orthodoxyouthministries.org, join our mailing list, and even get a free PDF on relational ministry. And, of course, do the YouTube stuff. Like this video, share it, and be sure to subscribe to this channel so that you can receive more videos on how to reach young people with God's love. Until then, we at OYM wish you all peace and sincerely pray that something good happens for you today.